Please help me in welcoming Laura Sims.
Wow, Connie, that's like putting an ocean in a very small teacup. Done well. It was very hard to decide in some ways what is really salient to say about what I don't call the revival, but the reawakening of storytelling in America. So I met Connie actually at the first festival that I was at in Jonesboro in 1977. And she was very excited because it was extraordinary that 200 people had come. Something very mysterious happened in the 1960s and the 1970s, and Jackie Torrance and I spent a lot of time just mulling over this. Somehow, throughout the United States, people were called to reinvestigate a deep regard, perhaps the most fundamental need for stories that had gone underground through 2 world wars and a kind of materialistic revolution in the United States. And myself, who started telling stories after dropping out of graduate school, which I attended for 3 days. Jackie, who started telling stories in the library. All over the country, there were people beginning to tell stories and not knowing why. And among First Nations, it wasn't that storytelling disappeared. It was that it was silenced, so it germinated in the depths of the earth and beneath people and grew even more powerful and more relevant into the modern world. Appalachian storytellers like Ray Hicks and others wore their well-worn immigrant roots on stage. Something mysterious happened, and when 2 CETA workers, I forget, Jim knows what the name of that is.
Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, LBJ.
Came to New York and asked me to record stories. I recorded an African folktale because I was in love with anthropology. I was in love with what happened between myself and an audience when I did drop out of school, because I had this amazing experience of telling a Russian fairy tale that my mother told to me in a situation in Central Park. So they came and they recorded me and asked me to come to the festival. And I remember taking a walk with Jimmy Nail Smith in 1977 over a little bridge, which is now a sort of concrete bridge, where there's an enormous tent, but then it was just a little grove of trees. And he said to me, maybe you should come to the board meetings and you should bring a kind of New York urban storytelling. And I, as one can say in the hubris of youth, well, I'll bring the entire world. And actually, that's what I set out to do. And I engaged in what I think of as the most extraordinary conversation. Our board meetings, I wish everybody had been there, not for the food. As a New Yorker, it was a cholesterol festival. But my unlikely family members, we talked about stories and storytelling. We talked about why tell stories, what happens when a story is told, And how are we going to make festivals and conferences that inform people way beyond just entertaining them? We were interested not just in a pablum-producing, comfort-driven American dream, but we were interested, committed in America dreaming. Wide awake. There are two things I wanted to say about the festivals, the making of those festivals, the conferences, and something extraordinary that began to happen. And like very new things that really shake up the kind of comfort zone, I, with Connie, created 2 international festivals, and I was literally run out of town. But what happened on those stages was something we talked about for years. We talked about bringing together, which we did, bringing Ifat Mujuru, great son of diviners from Zimbabwe, who was a master storyteller in his culture, on stage with Spoon Williams, who was a street performer from Chicago, rooted in slave narratives and African rhythms. There were Indian bowl singers, extraordinary, sort of exceptional solo performers singing the life stories of Hindu deities on stage, with somebody like J. O'Callahan telling his personal stories. There was Vai Takshablu Hilbert, a great elder of the Salish nation, who had invested her life, she was a hairdresser during World War II, who learned her Lushootseed language and then devoted her life. And I met her at a festival on women and story in Washington, D.C. in the 1980s. And like Connie, that's what we were doing. We may have even been there together, come from a famous storytelling event at Walla Walla, Washington, where there were more storytellers on stage than people in the audience. Another great money-making event. But it's not always about how many people are in the audience or numbers or money. Sometimes it's about the alchemical event itself, that like in the chaos theory, when a wing moves somewhere else, there's a storm in the world, somewhere half across the world. Vi came to the festival. She stood on stage. She was old at the time, and actually at the time younger than I am now. Come to think of it. With Ron Evans, keeper of the talking sticks, and they told fart stories. That was nothing compared to when Spalding Gray came and said the F word, which was really a source of tremendous storytelling in Jonesboro. 2 minutes, thank you. David Holt gathered together contemporary ballad singers and amazing old musicians and singers who stood up on stage together. Audiences were riveted. And there was laughter, and there was mime, and there was comedy, and there was everything else, but it was balanced with this dreaming wide awake of how are we going in some ways to keep open the channels of story in our world so we can access what makes us human beings. We were a force that was interested in what are the roots of aggression and conflict and injustice in the world. And we talked about these things at our board meetings. But what I really want to say is what makes me really happy is that in every fairy tale, the fool, the one who is dreaming and sitting by the fire so long, very often is the one who goes out and is obstructed and stopped, broken apart, disappears, makes a journey to the underworld, but there is where they get stronger. And I think we're not orphans. I think our roots have been growing deeper and stronger. And there is more interest and a vaster understanding and possibility of storytelling today than there was 40 years ago. And one last thing, when somebody asks me, how can I be an advocate for storytelling, and I am, I made a decision. I would learn as much, I would become articulate, and I would become the best storyteller I could possibly be, because nothing in the world is as potent and as dangerously good. So thank you very much, and thank you, Connie, and all my remarkable brothers and sisters.
Beth Horner is our next Olio's storyteller in this historical spiral look at this revival. Beth is a powerful voice in the storytelling world. She was on the board as we were moving out from Jonesboro, seeing events happen in other places. She was helping with those reins and those unruly horses. She's a great storyteller, and I am honored that she's here today. Let's welcome her.
You know, Connie asked each of us to talk about our mentors and our fire keepers in our own lives, and we didn't have time to do this earlier, so I'm just going to ask everybody. Just stand up and call out a mentor in your life for storytelling. Right now you have 15 seconds. Call it out. Now turn to somebody next to you and tell them that name again. Yay. Wow. The room is filled with all of them, all of them. And a lot of my mentors are in this room. And a lot, did I do that? No. Oh, thank you. And will we get shocked? Okay. Okay. We will. Somebody take this. It's dangerous. Okay. You know that song, we are not the first and we won't be the last. The thread's wound too tight to unravel. If we stare in the mirror and never look back, we won't know the roads we have traveled. Generations, a Saigon song. I come from the second generation of what we're calling the storytelling revival. We were the teenagers coming onto the scene, and it was our job to rebel and be mad at these people who had lovingly put together this wonderful festival and this wonderful organization. We wanted to stretch our wings and do new things. And Jim May said, Beth, why don't you run for the board of directors of the organization? I said, you do it. He's nominated me and I got on there. It's all your fault, Jim May. My mentor was Ellen Greene. I had grown up hearing stories from my grandmother, who had memorized fairy tales from library books, and my father, who told stories of our ancestors of good and questionable repute. And I learned that if you became a librarian, you could tell stories. So I went to graduate school. And I went to a school that had 2 storytelling courses listed in the catalog. The University of Illinois, when I got there weren't any. They had stopped them. So I said, I became what one board member later called me, Beth Axe to Grind Horner. You better bring in somebody to teach storytelling or I'm leaving. And they brought in Ellen Greene from Rutgers University, who had come from the New York Public Library School of Storytelling. People like Augusta Baker and people like that. They had put together storytelling for immigrants who had come in to the United States the early part of the century and told stories to something kind of new then, children. in libraries. And Ellen became my mentor, and she was on the board of the NAPS organization. And she said, you know, there's a festival, and people make their living. There's these people called the folk tellers who make their living telling stories. So I went down to the festival, and I volunteered, and I met Connie Regan-Blake as she guided us through the festival. And it was the first year that on Friday night there were too many people to fit into one tent. And suddenly, they had to open up the second tent that was usually only reserved for the daytime. And Laura Sims ran up to the other tent to MC, but there was no sound, and there were no lights hooked up yet in that tent. She didn't care. She had us all doing the squeaky door in the dark till they could get things going. Do you remember that? Till they could get things going. I was inspired by Michael Parrott telling stories, by Ron Evans, by these two tellers from Texas, the 12 Moon Storytellers. One was a librarian. Do you know who that was? Elizabeth Ellis and Gail Ross. Right. I was inspired. I became then a librarian. And the Institute was happening Friday, Saturday, Sunday of a weekend for an entire month. And on Thursday night, I would leave my job. I would drive all night from Illinois to Jonesboro, Tennessee, and I would be there, and I would hear J. O'Callahan talk for a whole weekend on wonder. Then I would drive back and start work again on Monday morning. Connie Regan-Blake and Barbara Freeman doing a workshop on taking your storytelling on the road, and I thought maybe I could do that. So I did that. But we were young, and we were passionate. And the passion wasn't really well thought out. And Connie and all these people, they were spreading it throughout the country. People were like, yeah, oh, we want to play. Good, can we come? Can we play? No, we want to play. No, really, hey, we want to play. You better let us play. If you don't let us play, we're getting really pissed off here. So Jim nominated me for the board, and I became Beth Horner. And I missed the first board meeting because I was ill, and so Jimmy Neal called me up because we didn't have email, and we didn't keep notes of the board meetings. And this was, Laura was no longer on the board, and they had put the lineup together because then the board chose the lineup for the festival. It was a working board, a working staff type of board. It was people working hard. But it was all the people who had been on the board who were going to tell stories. And I said to Jimmy, from my bed, there is going to be a revolution. I've heard about your axe grinding, Beth. And anyway, I said, we've got to do something different. And Jimmy and I sat down with input from others and put together a 10-member advisory council from all over the United States. I called out my friend in California, and I said, hey, who in California would be good to be on this 10-member advisory council? She said, Gay Ducey. We brought Gay Ducey into this, and who else was on that board? There was Nan Kamen, and there was Len Cabral, 10 people from around the country. Wow, we wanted to open it up around the country. I went to the next board meeting where we were deciding the next festival, and by then, Mary Gay Ducey was an actual board member, and Milbury Birch was there too, and I'm trying to represent us teenagers, and we said, who are we going to have on the board? Okay, who are we going to have at the festival? Okay, we're going to have, oh yeah, they've been there 12 times. Okay, we're going to have this 17 times. Okay, we're going to have, this isn't going to work. We can't keep featuring ourselves. And one board member honestly said, if we don't feature ourselves, who are we going to feature? I said, there's a lot of storytellers out there. There's this guy in Minnesota who tells stories with a hose. There's John Spellman who does letters from Vietnam. There's a lot of storytelling. And we made a rule. No board member can be featured at the storytelling festival at that time because we were growing. And also, if you're featured at the festival, you can't be featured for another 3 years. It was going to be different every single year. Yeah, that's the way it was going to be. So we started getting, and Mary Gay Ducey said, hey, I know somebody from California. Everybody said, California? You're going to put somebody from California on the festival? Yeah. I said, Sid Lieberman from the Midwest. The Midwest, wow. Jimmy, I said. We started to open up. We started to open up geographically in the United States. It was a little different. And we teenagers, oh, we were so excited. We were really excited. But it got hard. And then we became the generation people were voting against. We really like those people who are our parents. Can we go sit in their laps for a while now? Anyway, I can't remember when I started. Do you know how much time I have? Great. Okay. Well, anyway, the idea was to expand, and we worked on that. We did that through the organization, through this council. We put by putting people from the region on the board itself, and then we also oh gosh, I don't know. I have so much to say. Oh, we had our first Congress. I said, let's get the conference out of Jonesboro. We had it in St. Louis. We started putting it all around the country, and not only was it just a workshop the way it had been, now it was going to be an actual meeting of people. And people were going to have input into the organization because Jimmy Neal called it the National. The National. And that meant everybody wanted to play. So that was kind of where I was on this continuum. I am so grateful now as a gray-haired storyteller for 29 years telling stories, because I did leave my job. Thank you, Connie, I think. And I am so grateful for the people who came before me. I'm grateful from Catherine Wyndham, who did that first check and became the first member of NAPS, who when I was on the board came to me and said, could you tell them I do more than ghost stories? Maybe you could feature me at the festival. So I'm so grateful to these people who came before me, and mostly I'm grateful to the people who are coming after me and are saying, hey, let's do this. Hey, let's do that. And I encourage you to do that. Be that teenager, even if you're over 60, because you can only take us further and further. And maybe when you get up here, you'll also remember the foundation. But sometimes you have to get there first. Thank you very much.